I never imagined that a simple moment in my own home could change how I saw my life forever. That morning began like any other, quiet, ordinary, almost forgettable. I stood in the kitchen, holding a cup of tea that had already gone cold, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sounds of the house waking up. At my age, mornings were slow, careful. Every movement carried the weight of years, but I had learned to accept that. What I had not learned to accept, what I wasn't ready for, was how invisible I had become. This house was once filled with laughter. I remembered when my children were young, running through these same rooms, their voices echoing against the walls. I had built my entire life around them. My time, my strength, my dreams. Every sacrifice felt worth it back then. I believed that love, when given fully, would one day return to me in the form of care and respect. That belief kept me going through years of exhaustion and quiet loneliness. But that morning something felt different. Not loud or dramatic, just a subtle shift in the air. Conversations stopped when I entered the room. Eyes avoided mine. Small gestures carried sharp edges. It wasn't the first time I had noticed it, but it was the first time I couldn't ignore it. I felt like a guest in the very place I once ruled with warmth and love. I tried to brush it off. I told myself I was overthinking. Old people do that, I had heard, become sensitive, emotional, difficult. So I smiled even when no one smiled back. I spoke softly, even when my voice went unanswered. I told myself that patience was my duty, that understanding was my role as a mother. But deep inside, a quiet fear began to grow. As the day unfolded, small moments piled on top of each other. Dismissive tones, rushed replies, doors closing just a little too hard. No one raised their voice. No one said anything cruel outright. Yet the message was clear. I was no longer a priority. I was an inconvenience. A burden that no one wanted to name. I retreated to my room that afternoon, sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at hands that had once worked tirelessly for this family. These hands had cooked countless meals, wiped tears, held children through sickness and fear. Now they trembled slightly, not from age alone, but from confusion and hurt. I wondered when exactly things had changed, and how I had failed to notice sooner. I told myself it would pass. Families go through phases, I thought. Tomorrow would be better. But somewhere deep in my heart, a truth was forming, slow, painful, undeniable. This wasn't a phase. This was the beginning of something far more painful than I was prepared to face. That night, as I lay awake listening to the house settle into silence, I realized something that shook me to my core. I was no longer safe in the place I once called home, not physically, not emotionally. And the most terrifying part was this: the people who were supposed to protect me were the ones making me feel afraid. That was the day I realized something was terribly wrong. At first, I tried to convince myself that nothing serious was happening, that what I was feeling was just a misunderstanding created by my own tired mind. Aging does that to you, people say. It makes you overly emotional, overly sensitive. So I swallowed my discomfort and carried on with my days as quietly as I could. I woke up early, before anyone else, because mornings felt safer when the house was still asleep. In those quiet hours, I could move around without feeling like I was in the way. I made my tea carefully, cleaned small corners of the kitchen, and kept myself busy with pointless tasks, all so I could still feel useful in some small way. As the days passed, I noticed how often I was apologizing. I apologized for sitting in the living room too long. I apologized for asking simple questions. I apologized for things that didn't even require an apology. The words came out automatically, as if my existence itself needed justification. No one asked me to apologize, but no one stopped me either. Silence, I learned, can teach you exactly where you stand. Meals became lonely affairs. Sometimes I ate alone in my room, listening to distant voices and laughter from the other side of the wall. Other times I joined them only to feel like an outsider at the table. Conversations moved quickly, skipping over me as if I wasn't there. When I spoke, my words were acknowledged with short nods or distracted responses. I stopped trying after a while. Being ignored hurts more than being told to stay quiet. My body began to betray me in small, frightening ways. The pain in my knees worsened, my back stiffened, and some days it took real effort just to stand up. I mentioned it once lightly, hoping for concern. The response was vague. "We'll see. Later. You'll be fine." Later never came. I learned to suffer quietly, because asking for help only reminded me how little attention there was for my pain. What hurt the most wasn't the physical discomfort, but the emotional distance that kept growing wider each day. The house was full of people, yet I felt completely alone. No one checked on me if I stayed in my room too long. No one noticed if I skipped a meal. I began to wonder, quietly and painfully, what would happen if one day I didn't come out at all. At night, memories of the past refused to let me sleep. I remembered the years I spent raising my children, the nights I stayed awake when they were sick, the sacrifices I never questioned. I never expected gratitude or reward, but I had believed naively, perhaps, that love leaves behind care, that giving your whole life to your family meant you would not be abandoned emotionally when you grew old. Slowly, fear started to settle in my chest. Not fear of being shouted at or thrown out, but a deeper, quieter fear, the fear of disappearing, of becoming so insignificant that my presence or absence would make no difference at all. That fear followed me everywhere, even into my dreams. I began spending most of my time in my room. It became both my refuge and my cage. I sat by the window for hours, watching the outside world continue without me. People walking freely, laughing, living lives that felt impossibly distant from my own. I wondered when my world had shrunk so much, and how I had allowed it to happen. Still, I stayed quiet. I told myself that patience was strength, that endurance was love. But deep inside, something was slowly breaking. I didn't yet realize it, but this silence I was clinging to for peace was quietly preparing me for a storm I was not ready to face. As time went on, the distance I felt inside that house slowly transformed into something far more disturbing. It was no longer just loneliness or neglect. It was fear, quiet and constant, settling deep inside my chest. I became painfully aware of every sound, every movement, every shift in tone. I learned to read moods the way one reads weather signs before a storm. A door closing a little too hard, a sigh filled with impatience, a look exchanged when I entered the room. These small things carried messages I could not ignore. I began adjusting myself constantly, changing my behavior, my timing, even my breathing, just to avoid becoming a problem. Existing started to feel like a careful performance where one wrong step could lead to consequences I didn't fully understand but deeply feared. I stopped expressing myself altogether. When asked a question, I answered briefly, cautiously, making sure my words couldn't be misunderstood. When discussions happened around me, about the house, about plans, about decisions that affected my daily life, I stayed silent, even when I wanted to speak. I told myself it wasn't worth it. Speaking up had become dangerous, not because it led to shouting, but because it led to irritation, dismissal, and coldness. That kind of response slowly teaches you that your voice has no value. And when you lose your voice, you begin to lose yourself. My days became repetitive and heavy. I woke early, spent hours alone, and waited for the day to end. I rarely left my room unless necessary. It wasn't comfort that kept me there, it was caution. I felt safest when I was unseen. The idea that a mother could feel safer hiding from her own family filled me with shame. Yet I couldn't deny it. Shame, I discovered, thrives in silence. It convinces you that your pain is your fault, that if you were stronger, quieter, easier, things would be better. Sleep offered no escape. Nights were filled with anxious thoughts and memories that replayed themselves relentlessly. I questioned everything. Had I failed as a mother? Had I raised my children wrong? Was this the price of aging, of becoming dependent? These questions hurt more than any physical pain I carried. I blamed myself because blaming myself felt easier than accepting that the people I loved could hurt me this way. My health continued to decline, and with it, my sense of security. There were days when standing up made me dizzy, when pain shot through my legs without warning. I worried constantly about falling, about getting sick, about needing help. The thought terrified me. Not because I didn't trust my body, but because I didn't trust my surroundings. What would happen if I needed urgent care? Would anyone take me seriously? Would my pain be seen as an inconvenience, an exaggeration, another burden? I began to understand that fear does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it grows quietly, disguised as routine. It teaches you to accept less, to expect nothing, to shrink. Convinces you that this is normal, that this is just how life is now. And that realization frightened me more than anything else. That I was slowly accepting a life where fear felt ordinary. There were moments when a small voice inside me whispered that this was wrong. That family should never make you feel unsafe. That love should never require silence. But that voice was fragile, easily drowned out by years of conditioning. I had spent my life being strong for others, enduring hardship without complaint. Now that same endurance was working against me, trapping me in a situation that was quietly destroying me. I often stood by the window in my room watching the outside world. I saw elderly women walking freely, talking, laughing, living lives that still belonged to them. I wondered when my life had stopped feeling like my own. I felt trapped not by walls but by fear, by dependence, by the belief that I had nowhere else to go. Leaving seemed impossible. Staying felt unbearable. I existed somewhere between those two realities, frozen by uncertainty. What I didn't realize then was that fear, once acknowledged, begins to lose its power. Deep inside me, beneath the exhaustion and self-doubt, something was stirring. A quiet awareness. A growing understanding that silence was no longer protecting me. It was endangering me. That realization had not yet fully formed, but it was coming. And when it did, it would change everything in ways I could never have imagined. This was the stage where fear stopped being a warning and became a turning point. I was still silent, still careful, still afraid. But somewhere within me, the strength I thought I had lost was beginning to wake up, and it would soon demand to be heard. There comes a point when silence stops being a shield and starts becoming a weapon used against you. I reached that point slowly without realizing it at first. Each day the fear I lived with grew heavier, pressing down on my chest until even breathing felt difficult. I was constantly tense, waiting for something to go wrong. Even when nothing was happening, my body reacted before my mind could. My hands shook, my heart raced, and a tight knot lived permanently in my stomach. This was no longer just emotional pain. It was fear living inside my body. I started noticing how my presence alone seemed to irritate others. A simple request, like asking where something was or mentioning that I wasn't feeling well, was met with sighs or impatient expressions. No one shouted at me. No one openly threatened me. And yet the message was clear. I was a problem. A burden. Someone whose needs were inconvenient. That kind of quiet rejection cuts deeper than loud anger ever could. One evening after a particularly long and exhausting day, I felt something shift inside me. My body hurt more than usual, and exhaustion weighed on me like a heavy blanket. I needed help, just a little understanding, a little care. I gathered my courage and tried to speak, carefully choosing my words so they wouldn't sound like complaints. I said I was struggling. I said I felt lonely. I said I was scared. My voice was soft, almost pleading, but it was honest. What happened next broke something inside me. Instead of concern, I was met with irritation. Instead of listening, I was interrupted. My feelings were dismissed as exaggeration, as drama, as a problem I was creating. I was told to be grateful. Grateful for having a roof over my head, for not being alone, for being tolerated. In that moment I realized something devastating. My pain was not unseen, it was simply unimportant to them. The room felt smaller as emotions escalated. My heart pounded, my head spun, and my legs felt weak beneath me. I wanted to leave, to go back to my room, to escape the tension, but my body betrayed me. I lost my balance and fell hard to the ground. The pain was sharp and immediate, but what hurt even more was the shock, the disbelief that this was happening in my own child's home. As I lay there, stunned and hurting, voices around me changed from frustration to panic. Someone called for help. Someone knelt beside me. But it was too late to undo what had already happened. Lying on the floor, vulnerable and afraid, I felt a painful clarity settle over me. This was no longer just emotional neglect. This was no longer something I could manage by staying quiet. My safety was at risk. In that moment, something inside me finally broke. Not my spirit, but my denial. I could no longer pretend that patience would fix this. I could no longer believe that love alone would protect me. I saw the truth clearly for the first time. Staying silent had not kept me safe. It had brought me here, injured and frightened, realizing how fragile my situation truly was. As help arrived and the chaos slowly settled, I stared at the ceiling and felt tears slip silently down my face. Not just tears of pain, but tears of loss. I was mourning the family I thought I had. the future I had imagined, the safety I believed would always exist for me. That future was gone. And in its place, a terrifying but undeniable decision began to form. I could not stay here anymore. That fall was not an accident, it was a warning. A final message my body and soul delivered together, telling me that if I stayed, something far worse could happen. As I was helped up and taken away, I knew deep inside that this moment had changed everything. The silence was over, and once broken it could never be repaired. The days after that fall passed in a haze of pain and confusion. My body ached in ways I had never felt before, every movement reminding me of how fragile I had become. But it was my heart that felt the heaviest. The house that once held memories of love now felt unfamiliar, almost hostile. I moved slowly, carefully, not just because of my injuries, but because fear had taken up permanent residence inside me. I watched faces closely, listened to tones, measured every word I spoke. Nothing felt safe anymore, not even silence. People spoke to me differently now. Their voices were softer, their movements more cautious, as if gentleness could erase what had already happened. Apologies floated around the room, but they felt incomplete, carefully worded, more focused on calming the situation than understanding the pain beneath it. I listened, nodded, and said very little. Something inside me had gone quiet, not the fearful silence from before, but a different kind. A silence filled with clarity. For the first time I allowed myself to ask a terrifying question. What if I don't stay? The thought alone made my chest tighten. I had spent my entire life believing that a mother's place was wherever her children were. Leaving felt like betrayal, like failure, like abandoning the role I had lived for. But another thought followed quickly behind it, one I could no longer ignore. What if staying costs me my life? I began to understand that fear had been guiding my decisions for too long. Fear of being alone, fear of judgment, fear of being labeled ungrateful. Yet none of those fears were as powerful as the one growing inside me now, the fear of disappearing completely. I had already lost my voice, my sense of safety, and much of my identity. If I stayed, what would be left? At night, sleep refused to come. I lay awake replaying moments from the past, searching for signs I might have missed, chances I could have spoken sooner. Regret wrapped around me tightly, but I forced myself to face a painful truth. I did the best I could with what I knew at the time. Blaming myself would only keep me trapped. The decision to leave did not come suddenly or dramatically. It formed quietly, built from exhaustion, fear, and the growing understanding that endurance was no longer strength. It was self-destruction. Choosing myself felt unnatural, almost wrong after a lifetime of sacrifice. But deep down, I knew this choice was not about anger or punishment. It was about survival. When I finally admitted to myself that I needed to go, I cried, not from weakness but from grief. I was mourning the family I thought I had, the home I believed would always protect me. Letting go of that dream hurt more than any physical injury I carried. But holding on to it would have hurt even more. As the days passed, I began making quiet preparations. Nothing obvious. Nothing confrontational. Just small steps toward safety. Each step filled me with fear, but also with a strange sense of relief. For the first time in a long while, I felt a faint but steady pull toward something better, even if I didn't yet know what that looked like. The choice to leave terrified me more than staying ever had. But for the first time, I understood that fear does not always mean danger. Sometimes fear means you are standing on the edge of change. And I was finally ready to step forward. The day I finally left, there were no dramatic goodbyes and no loud arguments. I didn't want confrontation, and I no longer had the strength for explanations that would change nothing. I packed quietly, choosing only what I truly needed. Each item I touched carried a memory, years of life folded into small, ordinary objects. My hands trembled not because I was unsure, but because I knew this moment was irreversible. Once I stepped out, there would be no returning to the illusion I had lived under for so long. As I walked through the house one last time, I felt an unexpected calm mixed with deep sorrow. The walls had witnessed everything: love, sacrifice, silence, and pain. I paused for a moment, placing my hand against the doorframe, remembering the woman I used to be when this place felt like home. That woman had given everything without question. The woman leaving now carried something different: clarity. Stepping outside felt both terrifying and freeing. The air seemed different, lighter, as if my lungs were finally allowed to breathe fully. Still, fear followed me. I had no clear plan, no certainty about where I would go or how I would manage. At my age, starting over felt impossible. Yet staying had already proven more dangerous than the unknown ahead. The first days away were disorienting. I felt uprooted, unsure of where I belonged. Every unfamiliar sound startled me. Every quiet moment made me question my decision. Guilt crept in constantly, whispering that I had abandoned my duty, that a mother should endure anything for her children. That voice was loud, persistent, and cruel. But each time it spoke, another voice answered softly. You deserve to be safe. My body needed time to heal, but my mind needed even more. Simple tasks exhausted me. I moved slowly, cautiously, relearning how to trust my surroundings. Yet despite the uncertainty, there was a strange peace in knowing that no one would raise their voice at me, dismiss my pain, or make me feel like a burden. That peace, however fragile, felt priceless. Loneliness came in waves. I missed the idea of family, the comfort, the closeness, the sense of belonging I had hoped for all my life. But I also recognized that missing what should have been did not mean returning to what had harmed me. That realization was painful, but it gave me strength. Each morning I reminded myself why I left. Not to punish anyone, not to prove a point, but to protect what little of myself I still had left. I began to understand that dignity is not something others give you. It is something you claim when you refuse to accept less than you deserve. I did not know what the future held. The road ahead was uncertain, and fear still walked beside me. But for the first time in a very long time, fear was no longer controlling me. I had walked away with almost nothing, but I carried my dignity with me. And that, I realized, was enough to begin again. Time did not heal me all at once. It worked slowly, quietly, almost invisibly. In the beginning, every day felt uncertain, as if I were walking on unfamiliar ground without a map. I woke up unsure of what I was supposed to do next, who I was supposed to be now that my entire identity was no longer centered around my family. For decades, my purpose had been clear: to serve, to support, to endure. Without that role, I felt empty, even lost. Yet within that emptiness, something new had space to grow. There were moments when guilt returned without warning. It arrived in the form of memories, my children as they once were. Small hands reaching for mine, voices calling me mom with love and trust. Those memories hurt more than the recent pain. They made me question myself all over again. Had I been too harsh by leaving? Should I have tried one more time? Could I have fixed things if I had just stayed silent a little longer? These questions circled my mind endlessly, especially during quiet nights. But with time came perspective. Distance allowed me to see patterns I had ignored for years. I realized that what happened was not a single moment of conflict or misunderstanding. It was the result of long-standing neglect, dismissed emotions, and a lack of respect that had slowly eroded my sense of safety. Understanding this did not erase the pain, but it removed the blame I had placed on myself. I was not weak for leaving. I was strong for surviving as long as I did. I began to notice changes within my body as my mind slowly settled. The constant tension I had lived with began to ease. My sleep improved. My breathing felt deeper, steadier. Fear no longer greeted me the moment I opened my eyes each morning. Instead, there was uncertainty. But uncertainty without fear felt manageable, even hopeful. I also learned that healing is not about forgetting. It is about accepting what happened without letting it define every part of you. I allowed myself to feel sadness without drowning in it. I allowed myself to feel anger without guilt. Most importantly, I allowed myself to feel compassion for myself. That compassion had been missing from my life for a very long time. Some relationships remained distant, marked by silence and unspoken tension. I no longer chased explanations or apologies. I had learned that closure does not always come from others. Sometimes it comes from finally telling yourself the truth and choosing peace over endless hope for change. As I rebuilt my days, I found strength in small routines and quiet moments. I discovered that I still had a voice, even if it was soft. I still had worth, even if no one else acknowledged it. Slowly, I began to trust myself again. And in that trust, I found something I thought I had lost forever: the belief that my life, even now, still mattered. I once believed that peace came from holding a family together at any cost. I believed that enduring pain quietly was a sign of love, and that a mother's strength was measured by how much she could sacrifice without complaint. It took me a lifetime to understand how wrong I was. Peace does not grow out of fear, and love should never require you to erase yourself. These truths did not come easily to me. They were learned through loss, heartbreak, and the painful courage of walking away. As time passed, I stopped waiting for things to return to the way they once were. I accepted that some chapters in life do not close gently. They end because they must. I began to shape my days around what brought me calm rather than what kept me tied to the past. Simple routines became my anchors, quiet mornings, slow walks, moments of reflection that reminded me I was still alive, still capable of choosing how I lived. There were moments when loneliness returned, sharp and sudden, but I learned to sit with it instead of running from it. Loneliness, I realized, was not my enemy. It was simply the absence of chaos. It gave me space to hear my own thoughts, to reconnect with parts of myself I had ignored for decades. In that stillness, I began to understand who I was beyond my role as a mother who sacrificed everything. Forgiveness became part of my healing, but not in the way others might expect. I did not forgive to forget or to excuse what happened. I forgave to release myself from carrying anger that only harmed me. Forgiveness became a quiet decision, made again and again, to choose my own peace over resentment. It did not reopen doors. It simply allowed me to move forward without being chained to the past. I no longer measured my worth by how much pain I could endure. I measured it by how gently I treated myself. I learned that boundaries are not acts of cruelty. They are acts of self-respect. And self-respect, I discovered, is something no one can take from you once you claim it. The future remained uncertain, but it no longer frightened me. I had faced my deepest fear, being alone, and survived it. That survival changed me. I was no longer afraid of standing by myself because I finally understood that standing alone was far better than standing somewhere I was not safe. This was not the ending I once imagined for my life. It was quieter, lonelier, and far more honest. But it was mine. And in choosing peace, even when it cost me everything I thought I needed, I gained something far more valuable than comfort or approval. I gained myself.